I previously made videos stating that the nameless star is called Stella or Sora, and that Yozora is mistaken Sora from Kingdom Hearts for Sora from Viren Rex. In other words, what I was trying to say was that what Yozora really means by saving Sora is saving the nameless woman that we see in the Viren Rex commercial. But these videos were a bit, I'm not gonna lie, they were a bit rough, but I still believe those theories were on point. And with some of the revelations that we've learned from Melody of Memory, I'm pretty much further convinced now, especially now since we've got confirmation that the Nameless Star is from the same world as Yozora.
But how exactly can she help?
It's simple. She came from the world on the other side.
What?
Huh?
So now I'm even more convinced with my original points, and now in this video what I'm going to be doing is doubling down on this theory. Which of course means if it turns out I'm wrong, I'm going to be taking double DLs for it. So whilst I would advise you to check out my theories from earlier this year, because I'm going to be skipping over most of the points that I already mentioned in them, I do honestly think that this one video alone should be enough for you to understand where I'm coming from with this theory. But if after this video you still don't see it, then I honestly doubt anything is going to be able to convince you. Regardless of whether or not you're convinced by the end though, this is going to be the last time I address this specific subject, because as far as I'm concerned, it's done and dusted. And honestly, I've already dedicated half of my current theory videos for Kingdom Hearts to this one subject. So yeah, I think I'd like to pretty much lay it to rest now. After this, I'm either going to be holding some W's or I'm going to be holding some L's. But just like many people don't want to let go of their Yozora and Sora theories, I'm not letting go of this one without a fight. Nomura himself is going to have to personally come and crush this theory, because I am not letting go. I will not relent, okay? So until Nomura comes and crushes this theory, or unless one of you in the comments completely somehow blows my mind and desolates it, I'm going to stick with it until the very bitter end. Now of course this video is going to contain spoilers for Melody of Memory, but I'm sure you already know that and that's why you're here. But if you didn't know that, well, now you do know. Based on Melody of Memory's ending, it would be easy to think that the Nameless Star is not called Sora, because at no point does she claim the name for herself. When she says, "Did I hear you say Sora?" she doesn't say, "That's my name," or "Oh, what a strange coincidence." She never at any point says that. So she seems to somehow understand that Sora is the person she met before, even though I'm pretty certain that Sora never actually told the Nameless Star his name. But even so, she seems to know Sora's name somehow. With that being said, the Nameless Star does mention something in the original scene between her and Sora, which may be the reason as to why she does not claim the name Sora for herself.
So, whose heart are you?
No one's anymore. They took away my name. Everything about me.
So she says that her name was taken from her. In fact, everything about her was taken from her. But notice how the one thing she specifically says was taken from her was her name. She could have said her face, her body, anything. But the thing she specifically mentioned was her name. So I'm gonna assume that's a pretty decent reason as to why she didn't respond to the name, because she no longer has her name for herself. But now that I've gotten that out of the way, allow me to proceed to present to you all the other reasons as to why I believe the Nameless Star is called Sora. So do whatever you got to do to make yourself comfortable, and let's go over this one more time. Now, as I said before, a lot of my theory is based on things that many of us already agree on. So we already agree that Yozora is a reimagining of Noctis from Versus 13. We all agree that whatever the name of the world he's from, Viren Rex, Quadradum, whatever, we all agree that it's a reimagining of the world of Versus 13. And now, even if you didn't agree with this before, I'm sure at this point now we pretty much are all on the same page that the Nameless Star is a reimagining of Stella from Versus 13. So if we agree that they're reimaginings of Versus 13, then looking back at what Versus 13 was supposed to be may allow us to find a clue about the nature of the character of Stella, aka the Nameless Star, and how that might support the idea that her name is in fact Sora. So, as I already said, many of us already agreed that Yozora, the Nameless Star, and Virum Rex or Quadratum are reimaginings of Versus 13. But a lot of people miss a key detail from Versus 13, and that is the fact that Stella was Noctis's opposite. Now, I'm sure some of you may know where I'm going with this one already. In Versus 13, Stella and Yozora were opposites. So for example, Stella wore white clothes and Noctis wore black clothes. There was even a point where when Stella was going to meet Noctis, the developers originally had put her in a darker dress, but they changed it because they wanted her to have a lighter dress because Noctis was already dressed in quite dark clothing. In other words, they wanted to emphasize the contrast between the two. This contrast between Stella and Yozora was integral to Versus 13. Now, because we don't have Versus 13, we don't know how integral or what exactly it would have meant or how far it would have went. But what we do know is that it was an important part of their characters. And as we could imagine, also their relationship. I mean, you can even see from the footage I've got here that Stella is clearly on the opposing side to Noctis. She's not coming across like as if she's his ally. Now, even when she was reworked into Luna Freya for Final Fantasy 15, she still maintained some of these contrasts, like the lighter clothing versus Noctis's darker clothing, and her still being part of the kingdom that opposes the kingdom that Noctis is from. But okay, that's Versus 13, right? That doesn't mean that with Kingdom Hearts and with Virum Rex that the contrast is still anything or that it still exists, right? Well, actually, if we look at the Virum Rex commercial, we can see that the girl in that commercial is wearing white, whereas again Yozora is in the darker clothing, just like in Versus 13. Even in this one scene where Yozora reaches out for her, you can see this almost kind of like yin and yang type of thing going on, and you can see such a clear contrast between the two, again, just like in Versus 13. Now, of course, a lot of us have been calling the Nameless Star Stella, and now with confirmation that she is indeed from the same world as Yozora, a lot more of us are calling the Nameless Star Stella. But to me, Stella is really just a placeholder because we don't actually know her true name. But even so, I have seen people claiming that the Nameless Star's actual true name is going to be Stella. It's not going to be anything else. But here's my thing about that. Yozora is a reimagining of Noctis, but he's not called Noctis, he's called Yozora. So the reimagining of Stella would not likely be called Stella, she'd be called something else. And I'll get into the names a bit more later, but if they're maintaining aspects of the original characters that they're reimagined from, if they're maintaining the contrast that was between Noctis and Stella in Versus 13, then it's very possible that their names will also be a reflection of that contrast. And as many of you already know, Yozora's name means night sky. And what would be the opposite of a night sky? A sky, right? And Sora means sky. If the world Yozora is from is truly a reimagining of Versus 13, then it's reasonable to assume he would still have a contrast just like he did as Noctis in the original Versus 13. And if he did still have a contrast, like in Versus 13, his contrast would not be Sora from Kingdom Hearts, because Sora isn't from his world, but this Stella reimagining is. So that means it's possible she's in some way still his opposite. And as I pointed out in the Virum Rex commercial, they're still showing that contrast, the dark and the light, the yin and the yang. Now consider this, the final world that we first encounter her in is literally a sky. And Yozora, the place we encounter him in, is literally a night sky. Again, this is the contrast I was mentioning earlier. The star is in a place that is light, and Yozora is in a place that is dark. This is the same contrast theme that is present in Versus 13. And if we can say that Yozora being in a final world with a night sky is reflective of his name, then why aren't we applying the same logic to the character we meet in the final world that has a regular sky? I mean, both of them are from the same world after all, so it's still very possible that she may be the sky to Yozora's night sky. Now, I know that Versus 13 is not exactly the same thing as Virum Rex or Quadratum, and the girl that appears in the commercial definitely appears to be a bit more helpless than Stella does in Versus 13. but they don't have to be exactly opposing each other in the way that they were in Versus 13. Remember, this is a reimagining. So in Viren Rex, it may just be that they're meant to contrast each other rather than actually oppose each other. However though, one thing that I did struggle to understand originally with the Remind ending was why Yozora wanted to fight Sora if he was supposed to save Sora. I mean, he actually says to Sora that if he is who he says he is, if he is indeed Sora, then that means that basically he has to fight him. Now, in Versus 13, Stella and Noctis, as I said, were not just contrasting each other, they were opponents. And yet, it's quite clear that they were also being set up to be love interests. But because we don't know the full story of Versus 13, we can't know how their relationship would have played out in that game. But we can infer that Noctis and Stella would likely have wanted to be together, despite the fact that they would have had to fight each other initially. If that's true, then I suppose it's possible that for some reason Yozora has to face his Stella, his Sora if you will, in order to save her. In the commercial, he is clearly trying to save her, but we don't know exactly what followed that commercial. I imagine we'd probably need a Viren Rex game or some sort of backstory to Yozora to understand exactly why Yozora wants to fight Sora in order to save Sora. But it is undeniable that for whatever reason Yozora believes that in fighting Sora and crystallizing Sora, that in some way that is going to be how he saves Sora. Now, like I mentioned in my original theory video on this matter, Yozora is clearly taking the matter of saving Sora way too personally. He doesn't know Kingdom Hearts Sora yet, but he clearly has a strong emotional connection to whoever this Sora he is mentioning is. And the only person that we've seen him have a clear emotional reaction to so far is this Nameless woman. So as I said earlier, the Nameless star doesn't have a name anymore. But why would she specifically have her name removed unless it meant something important? I mean, why would Nomura just cut her name out if it's something as straightforward as Stella? I've also seen people say that her name could be Hoshi, which is the Japanese name for star, and whilst that's not a bad idea, again, I have to ask then, if her name was something so straightforward, so blatant and obvious as just basically the Japanese name for star, then why would her name be missing? Why would it be that she doesn't ever say her name? I mean, surely she would have just introduced herself and said, hey, my name's Hoshi, or hey, my name's Stella. I mean, she's literally a star. Saying her name is Hoshi or Stella wouldn't really be that much of a shock because she's an actual star. And here's the thing, knowing her name was Hoshi or Stella wouldn't tell us anything more than we already know at this point by the end of Melody of Memory. Because it's already clear to us now that she's from the world on the other side. And as I mentioned in my previous theories, she already confirmed for us that Yozora is the person she's waiting for, and yet her name remains hidden. And it's remaining hidden for a reason, because whatever her name is, it's important. Hoshi is not an important name, and neither is Stella. Nomura likes to use naming conventions to tie groups together. So for example, the Wayfinder trio all have Latin names, the Destiny Island trio all have Japanese names, and the Days trio all have organization sort of names. You also see this with the Foretellers, whose names all seem to represent one of the 7 deadly sins, and you even see the Norse naming in games such as Dark Road. So if we follow his naming conventions and tendencies, then this goes back to what I was saying about Yozora not being called Noctis. Okay, yeah, sure, you could say he's not called Noctis because that's now the name of an official other character, right? And that is true. But it still doesn't change the fact that Yozora's name is Japanese. And as the Nameless star is clearly connected to him, in other words from the same world as him, it would make sense for her to also have a Japanese name. So Stella wouldn't fit because it's a Latin name. And also, if we look at the commercial for Viren Rex, we know for sure that the place the two of them are in that commercial is Shibuya. At least in that specific commercial. And everything we've seen about this place they're from, Quadratum or whatever the name of their world is clearly reflective of the real world Tokyo. So them having Japanese names would make the most sense. Now, the only hole I originally had for this part of the theory was the fact that Yuzora's companions were originally being called Magia and Aegis, but it's very important to note that this ended up being cut from the game. Now, that may have been because Nomura didn't want us to know their names, maybe the names were important, but I doubt it, because removing them from the game would actually just lead to us putting an even greater spotlight on it and analyze the scene even harder, which is exactly what ended up happening. Because it was cut, people started taking their names way more seriously. But alternatively, it could have been that he removed them from that scene because between the time of the demo and the actual release of Kingdom Hearts 3, Nomura decided that the names for Yuzora's companions no longer fit the naming conventions he wanted for that world. Remember, we didn't get the secret ending of Kingdom Hearts 3 with the base game, it came later, and then we got Remind to expand upon this same secret ending. So it seems to me like it was a story decision that was mostly decided, but perhaps some small tweaks were made towards the end of development. We didn't get any alternate names to replace them, so who knows, maybe that might be because their names are actually Magia and Aegis, but it may also be because their names are not Magia and Aegis, but whatever their names are might also still be too much of an indicator of things to come. Let's take a look at some of the actual facts that we know about Yuzora and the Nameless Star. Yuzora first appears in this Virum Rex game commercial, and a girl who has no name also appears in that same commercial. And Yuzora clearly seems to be trying to save whoever this nameless girl is. We can all agree on that, right? Okay, cool. So we also know that the Nameless Star is waiting in the final world for someone to come and get her. But the person she is waiting for is changed beyond recognition, and then she whispers the name of that person to Sora. We then see later that when Sora meets Yuzora, he asks Sora how he recognized him, literally using the same word that the Nameless Star used. Sora mentions that the girl told him about Yuzora, and the only girl Sora would be talking about is the Nameless Star. So that means the Nameless Star believes Yuzora specifically is the person coming to get her. And now we know for a fact, thanks to Melody of Memory, that she is indeed from the same world as Yuzora. Now, none of this yet proves her name is Sora. However, what else do we know to be a fact? We know that Yuzora was told to save Sora. And throughout that entire commercial we see him in, he is trying to save a nameless woman. The same woman we are now pretty certain is the Nameless Star. Is it really a coincidence that he's trying to save a woman in this commercial, and the next we see of him, he says he has a mission to save someone, somebody whose name just happens to be Sora? And as I said in my original videos on this, Yuzora doesn't recognize Sora from Kingdom Hearts as the Sora that he's thinking of, and he even seems to be a bit offended by the fact that Sora is using that name, meaning he has a very specific idea of someone in mind who has that name, and it's not Kingdom Hearts Sora. And remember, the commercial ends before Yuzora gets to save this nameless woman, so we don't know what happened next. So as far as we're concerned, he still hasn't saved her, and according to him, he still needs to save someone, and again, that someone is called Sora, and we know that the Nameless Star is hoping she will be saved by Yuzora. Now I'm going to go very meta with this final point, and I have to give thanks and a shout out to someone I'm sure many of you are already very familiar with, and that's Damo279. This dude went on a whole other level with the theory crafting when he made a video analysing the Master of Masters real world location, and he makes some fascinating discoveries in the video, so I would highly recommend you check out the video on his channel as he has some great content. But he mentioned something in this video, a detail that I simply cannot overlook, which as far as I'm concerned only further affirms everything I've said in this video. You see, according to his video, the girl from the Virum Rex commercial is standing atop a building's observation deck when she's charging up this magical beam, and that observation deck's name in real life is, wait for it, Shibuya Sky. And of course, as this is in Japan, the sky part will translate into Sora. Now, Shibuya and Quadratum may not exactly be connected in the way many people think they're connected, but we know for sure, based on the Virum Rex commercial, if we just look at the buildings and the city, the layout, the architecture, that this is definitely Shibuya, and we even know, thanks to that street sign, that it's even going by the name Shibuya. So this woman in the Viren Rex commercial is literally standing in a place that's called the Shibuya Sky in real life, or in other words, the Shibuya Sora. Let me say this again. This woman is standing in a place called the Shibuya Sky or Shibuya Sora, as Yozora is literally trying to save her. Save Sora indeed. So, that is the end of the video, guys. That's the whole theory, and that's it. That is why I believe the Nameless star is called Sora. Now, of course, at this point, you still may not be convinced, but honestly, if you ain't, I don't think anything is going to convince you. Either I'm going to be right with what I've put forth here, or I'm going to be completely wrong. So, I'm either going to be holding some W's or holding some L's. But I've got a very strong feeling that the next time we see something related to Viren Rex, so the next time we see that world, we may be very close to getting our answer. But anyway, I appreciate you for watching this video all the way to the end and for getting this far. I am still a very small channel, so of course I appreciate any and all bits of support that you guys provide. So of course, any likes, any comments, if you have your own thoughts, your own theories regarding this specific subject or anything that was revealed to us in Melody of Memory, then be sure to leave it below. I know there's a lot of different theories and a lot of ideas to discuss. I'm going to be trying to release a lot more theory videos and just a lot more thoughts on general on Kingdom Hearts as well as some other games. One of the theories that I'm going to be addressing is going to be to do with Yozora's trials and what exactly those trials may have actually been. So if you'd like to see that video, for example, then be sure to hit the subscribe and hit the bell notification so you know when it's released. Again, I appreciate you listening for this long. Thank you for watching. My name has been NextGenNovelist, and that's all I've got to say, and I'm out. Peace.